This is Writers Not Writing, the show where you can get to know your favorite writers and soon-to-be favorite writers by listening to them confess to the ways they procrastinate. Thanks for procrastinating with us. I'm Benjamin Gorman, and the quiet guy behind the glass there is Doug the producer. I write novels and collections of poetry and stuff. Doug tries his best to make me sound better. And each week we have a secret word to listen for. If you catch it, you earn the right to take an extra break at the time of your choosing from whatever is stressing you out. From Not a Pipe Publishing, welcome to Writers Not Writing.
Today's secret word is fruitcake.
Welcome, everyone. Rosemary Jones is a writer who translates games into fiction. Her novels are set in Dungeons & Dragons Forgotten Realms, and more recently, the spooky 1920s of Arkham Horror. Her latest is a Christmas novel called The Bootleggers Dance for Arkham Horror. Welcome, Rosemary. Very glad to have you here today.
Hello, nice to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Well, this is going to be fun. So, as regular viewers know, we always dress up in these costumes and then we describe them for our podcast listeners. So, tell everybody what you chose to wear today.
Well, obviously, because I'm always in 1926 these days, I'm in an absolute beaded extravaganza of a gown, and I probably should even have a bandeau and some feathers in my hair. And for those viewers who actually do check this out on YouTube, I'm in the beaded extravaganza of a vest because I own a lot of these. And so I'm very sparkly.
Yeah.
We're a couple days out from Christmas. So I thought I'd look like an ornament.
Well, and this show will release on Christmas Day. So folks who are
Oh,
listening to
okay.
this the day of launch, it is Christmas. And so I went with, to match the 20s feel, I went with this suit coat jacket that is red and white stripes. Suit coats that were printed with stripes were popular in the 20s. And then vests, of course, were very popular, but to be festive, went with this green vest. So I have the red and white striped suit coat, green vest, gold pocket chain, and then the red underneath my beard here, the red bow tie to match the coat. It's very 20s. It's very festive, and people who know me know this is way outside of my comfort zone. I'm not a bright colors person, but yes, to go with the 20s feel, I wanted to look the part here today.
It's
I've been
amazing.
really excited to have you on to talk about these Arkham novels that you've been working on. How did you come to turn these Arkham horror games into three novels without losing your mind within that, that
Within the
genre?
cosmic horror realm. Actually, so the interesting thing is about that is Aconite put out the call, is my publisher, in late 2019, which is when I got signed up to do the first Mask of Silver, which I pitched as silent movie crew films in haunted house in Arkham. And they went, ooh, okay, do that one. And I had read a little Lovecraft, who's kind of the underlying inspiration for these things was his kind of scientific horror stories. But I hadn't read in many, many years. So I requested the complete Lovecraft uh, books, which were a couple of collection volumes, which had a lot of side notes and a lot of history of the period as well. And they're the annotated Lovecraft are amazing. If you ever want to go look for them, the giant volumes weigh a ton. They came from my local library, who's really used to me like requesting volumes on graveyards and volumes on this and volumes on that. And so they arrived, and I've got them in my apartment, and then COVID shut everything down.
Yeah.
And I lived with those two smoldering
Yes.
Lovecraft annotated books, like taking up half my desk for months before I could take them back. First of all, I had that whole library anxiety about, oh my gosh, these are going to be so overdue. Then, of course, I'm getting notes from the library saying, don't bring anything back. We're closed. Keep whatever you have. No fines. But, they just, I'm such a little library nerd. I'm like, oh, these are going to cost me a fortune, and then I had to keep reading them. So, too. So that was great fun because more than the text, it was kind of all the notation. So how do I get distracted from writing? I loved all the notations. So they would get into, well, he's being inspired by the polar explorations that are going on at this time, and this is who is getting lost up at the North and South Pole. And then I would go look those things up online. So I really spent a good part of the COVID lockdown being locked in my apartment with cosmic horrors. So
Yeah,
it was
which
sort of the beginning of this all.
yes, but I can't imagine it would challenge the sanity.
It did a little, but it was great fun. And also I think the other thing that people say, because I don't really write horror. I am so easily spooked and scared, as you can tell, probably even listen to me now. I write what I call cozy horror, which is I have somebody come in, they and their group of friends are uh, meet a very strange eldritch challenge. They overcome that challenge and maybe emerge a little chewed on the other end. But I resolve to have a happy ending. As I keep telling, Bootleggers Dance is actually kind of grimmer and scarier than some of my other books, and it's a Christmas novel. And I keep telling people it's okay. There will be a happy ending. I can't.
Right,
A couple of
right,
people have texted me going, like, when? I'm on the like
right.
final third, and everything is going horribly wrong. And I'm like, yeah, but it'll be all right. It's a I wouldn't do this to you for a Christmas holiday. It will end properly at a dance.
Yes. I
There
was
may be
asked.
carnivorous trees before then, but it will end properly at a dance.
Yeah, I was asked to write a short story for a cozy cosmic anthology called The Cozy Cosmic. And
So
I was
there's
like, I don't even know what that would entail. And so I bought my copy. I'm excited to learn what is Cozy Cosmic. But yeah, I love that idea. I'm one of these writers where I don't think of myself as a horror writer, but my current trilogy is paranormal with all, vampires and werewolves and, it's all these monsters interacting. And, my mother read the first one and couldn't even finish it. It was too scary for her. And I was like, oh, I don't think of myself as a horror writer, but apparently there are some very scary things that happen to I mean, not that happen to these characters. They're going to have a happy ending. They just, have to feed on people on the way. Like,
they'll
um,
make it. They'll be fine. Well, I think the interesting thing about that, I've been talking about this in a lot of conventions about what makes something cozy. And I think, even to back up off that word, Gail Carringer, who writes steampunk and is an amazing author, if you've read any of her stuff, came out with a nonfiction book a few years back called The Heroine's Journey, where she goes back to the Ishtar myth and Persephone and a lot of other female related mythology, and talks about the difference between the hero's journey, which we all kind of know from Joseph Campbell and Star Wars, that it is about the collective, and the hero, because it could be a hero or a heroine or a non-binary person. So the protagonist collecting together a group of people,
yes.
found family or family, it can be both, who aid them on the way. At various points, they will try to go it alone. They will go all the way down to death. Ishtar dies and then is reassembled by those who love her in the Egyptian mythology. And they will come back out on the other end and defeat whatever it is that the challenge is. Now, I was reading that while I was kind of between uh Deadly Grimoire, which I just finished, and starting on Bootleggers Dance, and went, oh, that's what I write.
Yes.
It finally clicked because I kept going, I'm not really a standard hero's journey, go it alone, tough guy. I generally have people who are sort of underpowered, get stuck into a situation, and then have to rely on their friends and family to get themselves through. And so I just, for anybody who wants to not write, but be inspired for their writing, I
Right.
recommend The Heroine's Journey. It's quite fascinating. I also think if you've had a chance to see the Netflix series Wednesday, it's almost beat for beat what character
Mm.
is the heroine's journey.
Yeah, that I
Amazingly so. I mean, I like went back and rewatched it, going, oh my gosh, all
Yeah.
the way down to, and I'm sorry if spoiler alert, to she dies and then she comes back. And
Yeah.
I'm and just at that beat moment, I went, wow, this is and the whole point of this series, if you've watched it, is that she starts out as a very isolated, tough little Wednesday that she is, and that by the end, the real triumph of that is that she has collected friends and she has always had family. I mean, that's the other interesting thing about the Adams, which I always think kind of our cozy horror, that for all their strangeness, they are always there for each other,
They love
right?
their family.
They
Yeah.
love their family. Even Wednesday, who gets into trouble at the beginning, it's because somebody has attacked her brother, and only she is allowed to do that.
Yeah.
And she
Yes.
she takes them out because they've attacked Pugsley. So yeah, so there's I think this is very interesting. And I think when we look at that, a whole lot of it gives us a different way to write fantasy fiction. It doesn't need to be Game of Thrones,
Yeah.
good as those are, but this is a different approach. And then when we start talking about found family and functional families and all these things fit into this type of fiction.
Oh, I need to check that. My current series is female protagonist who is the least superpowered of the group, and she is acquiring the more powerful characters who can aid her. And I'm also thinking about when I think about the Ishtar story, the Persephone story. There's a different relationship to home in myths about female protagonists.
Mhm.
Home is not this place you leave and you go on this big giant journey to accomplish this thing, and then you kind of reluctantly come home. Like home is the point, building a home and building a family.
Right.
Um,
That's the success point. Whereas with Lord of the Rings, which is kind of a classic hero's journey, at the end, he succeeds. Frodo has succeeded. He is, again, spoiler alert if you've never read Lord of the Rings, I'm sorry to muck it for
yeah,
you, but he succeeds. He defeats the big evil, and then he can no longer go home.
yeah, yeah. Well, or I mean, I think of,
Tries for a while, but it's no longer comfortable, and he has to go off. Essentially, he's going off to another reward, which we will. But it's a little like we're sending the puppy to the
yeah.
farm upstate. He'll
Well,
be
and
back, you know.
and I think of the Odyssey. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a
honestly,
spoiler for anybody who's not read this 2,800-year-old epic poem.
yeah.
But the whole point is to come home, and yet we get the only scenes at home are her scenes. And his scenes are, the whole journey, and then he gets home, and their final interaction is him kind of going, home is different now because I'm here, but not I've made home this thing, that is important, that is valuable. She has preserved the home, and he has gone off and had adventures and marriages or relationships. He's
Yeah,
done.
he's had whatever, but he's had his well, that's the hero's journey too, that he's
Yeah,
sex as a reward, which is also into the hero's journey. Whereas the heroine's journey is about building relationships. Yeah, and the interesting thing is you could probably argue, and a lot of writers have, is he doesn't stay, that Odysseus cannot settle because
yeah,
he has spent 10 years traveling and he is incapable of settling, which leads you to the great Tennyson poem, to seek, to strive, to find,
yeah.
and yield. Which, go find it. It's a wonderful poem because it's all about him as an old man getting ready to leave again.
Leave
And
again.
the
His
mythology
own.
itself does, he's cursed. Remember, he's still cursed. And so the mythology itself does say that he can only die and be buried when nobody recognizes what the oar is for a ship. That he
Yeah,
has to go so far from the sea that says Poseidon can no longer um
yeah. Harry
interfere with
him,
his life.
attack him,
No,
and
because I curse him. The curse is over. When he goes
yeah,
inland so far that somebody looks at the oar on his shoulder and says, "What's that?"
yeah,
Yeah, you know, and then essentially he is gone from everything he loves,
yeah.
because that is the refrain throughout the Odyssey, is that he is forever striving, forever looking for that next adventure, that next clever out. I mean, there's a lot of people who go back and forth about, is he a good guy or a bad guy? and you can present him either way when you do rewrites of Greek mythology. I am a huge Odysseus fan, me and Athena, where, he's our dude. Because he's a very clever man. He's not a terribly powerful man, but he's a very clever man, and he talks his way out of so much of the trouble he gets himself into. So
Yeah, but I love the, and I'm blanking on her name. His wife is
Penelope
Penelope.
is equally clever.
Yes,
Yes.
and yes, she is clever. And their first interaction after,
Oh yeah.
20 years apart is him being distrustful of her. Like,
Yes.
he can't come home and say, I'm so glad to be home, to be back with you. Right away, she has been just as heroic, I would argue, in many ways,
Oh yeah,
more heroic
she's
than
kept
he
like
has.
20, 30 dudes out of basically from
Yeah,
taking over the kingdom. She's got
he
them all down
saved the kingdom. And
in the
he,
backyard, and been feeding them and then ripping it up out her weaving every night so that they can't force her to marry them. And oh yeah, no, Penelope is
yeah, she's this wonderful character.
she,
And right away, he's awful to her. Like, just, I mean, reading that, I just think he's so terrible to her. He comes
yeah,
home and instead of, hey, tell me how you've done this amazing thing and kept this kingdom intact, he comes back and he's like, where's the bed?
where's yeah.
Like,
Well, and it is he's also she's the whole bed thing too is one of the great classic mythology riddles because again, spoiler, the bed is built off a trunk of a tree and cannot be moved. So when she says she'll bring the bed out to the courtyard for him because she's not going to let this stranger into her bedroom. And he says, "What have you done to my bed? Because you can't move it." That is the two of them are essentially playing riddle games with each
yes.
because she doesn't necessarily recognize him. He
I mean,
is,
he showed up in a disguise.
yeah, he's shown up in a disguise. But anyway, you could even argue after, you know, he's basically been gone 20 years.
Yeah.
So 'cause it's 10 years for the Trojan War, 10 years for the journey home. Honey, I'm so sorry I got lost on the way, like
Yeah.
pull me
Who is
another
this
one.
person who's coming back to me? Even if he is Odysseus, who is he to her? She doesn't know.
Yeah, who is he? He's
Um,
really been gone. But their whole marriage is set on this because remember Penelope is half sister to Helen, and he very cleverly gets out of all the arguing about who's going to marry Helen by saying, telling their father, I will tell you how to settle all these suitors who are about to tear that kingdom apart. I'll tell you how to pick Helen's husband if you give me Penelope.
yeah.
Which is always interesting. So this is where, Odysseus to me is always like, he's there. He's clever enough even to have maybe won the most beautiful woman in the world. And he looks around, he goes, no, I want her sister because she's the smart
The
one.
smart one.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I'll take her. I always think, theirs is a very complicated, there's a wonderful, and I mean, I think you could write these books in many different ways and I think this is the other thing about the Odyssey is why you keep coming back to it. There are many clever women in it who show up, that who give as good as they get.
I really enjoy Margaret Atwood's Penelopead, which is not my favorite of her books, but it is I love the
Yeah.
way that she revisits that character and allows us to go, oh yeah, there's so much, there's such richness to this character that is this text gives us so much to work with all these various characters. And somebody should tell the story of Telemachus. We don't get that story enough. I mean, his story
We
is, I think, fascinating.
we don't. There's a lot of interesting later writers who do a little bit of Telemachus and have him go off and do his own um journey. These are sort of late Greek, early Roman, some of that stuff. There's even one version, I think, where he goes off and marries Helen,
Mm.
um, because she's kind of the only one left standing.
Yeah, yeah.
Helen survives
Poor
everything. It's really always
Helen, she
like
survives everything, but she's always an object.
she's always
That,
an object. Yeah, she doesn't really have much personality. I feel poor Helen needs her own book someday. That'd
yeah.
be really good. But yeah, so there's a lot of people who have, it was interesting because it isn't just us now go back and rewrite the myths. they did that. I mean, the Greeks did that, the Romans did that, everybody did. There's bits and pieces in the medieval chronicles that we'll pick up. Circe is always a fascination,
Yes.
and she just keeps coming back. And I just speaking of what distracts me from writing besides mythology, I just got a chance to see Handel's Alcina live, and Alcina is another medieval sorceress who turns all her lovers into objects or creatures or the grass, and then finally Ruggiero, or however you want to pronounce him, this knight, comes, he falls under his spell. His fiance, which I always call Bradamante, but there's other ways to say that, probably better than my mangled French, who comes and rescues him because Alcina falls in love with her because she's disguised as a man. It's a
Interesting.
great handle that opera is, it's one of these great tangles of thought. Um, I've always read it and thought, oh, this would be so much fun to do as a book, but yeah,
Yeah. And see,
but
what
it,
I like to do is take something like that and then just radically change the setting. Like, okay, what if this were a science fiction story that was set
yeah.
on, what if this were, I love your idea of doing the silent film as, I mean, as kind of metaphor. Like there's a lot to work with in silent film too, in that
Oh,
era.
oh, the silent film. So it was so much fun. I mean, essentially, it's a King in Yellow story, which was an inspiration for Lovecraft, but was done by Robert Chambers, who is my apologies to Lovecraft, but I think he's a better writer. He's a really good writer. The King in Yellow, that short series, and that was another thing I discovered because I hadn't really read him until, of course, I'm trapped by COVID, and so it's all up on Gutenberg. So I'm sitting there reading online, and I'm going, these are really creepy stories, but they're weird too. They're not quite fantasy or horror the way Poe is. They're sort of science fiction-y,
Yeah.
and so then I was started playing with these elements of bringing in the technology. In the 20s, silent movies are all over the place. They're being made not just in Hollywood, but also there's a big movement down in Florida and a big group up in New York who are making them. And horror movies were fairly early on, even up into in the teens, were already very, very popular. So Mask of Silver set a little bit before the Game Time, which is 1926. It's set in 1923 because things are still a little bit looser then. There's studios aren't quite as much as in control. And so what I've basically got is, a guy who's making horror movies, he's making feature-length movies. There's a bit of a Cat and the Canary in there, which was kind of one of the first horror comedy movies that was made. But yeah, but spooking people out by that point, you've got the Nosferatus, you've got the Phantom of
Yeah.
the Operas, you've got um, Hunchback of Notre Dame. In fact, it's being made about that time. So Sydney is incredibly jealous of Lon Chaney and the publicity he's getting. So
Yeah.
that's why Sydney's going off to make Mask of Silver based on this weird script that his occultist grandfather has back in his hometown of Arkham, and he's decided for realism's sake he's going to take them all back to Arkham and film it in his house.
Yeah. Oh,
Bad
that's
idea. I mean, the
fantastic.
first
Yes, that's
line of the book says this was a bad idea, and then just goes from there. The other
yeah,
thing I got to do with it, because I collect early 20th century fiction, and I love early 20th century fiction, is if you know that period of American mystery writers, there was a woman named Mary Roberts Rinehart, which was hugely popular, kind of outsold Agatha Christie and all the rest. At the time, she's kind of fallen out of favor, but she created a genre that literally became known as the Had I But Known.
ah,
So her heroines are always telling the story after the fact, and they can be quite spooky. They always kind of say, but had I but known that the house was haunted, I would have never rented it for my summer vacation. This is kind
yeah,
of they go, and circular staircases, in fact, kind of that way. Now, in her case, even one of her best books, which was The Red Light, I want to say, um, they get down to the end of whatever the spooky, slightly supernatural thing that's going on, and always a murder, and and they're solving the murder and everything. And then there's always a very rational explanation.
Hmm.
So it always ends up being kind of, I always say it's kind of the Scooby-Doo. It's really Old Man Smithers in a
Yeah.
mask. But in my case, because I'm doing Arkham Horror, you to rip the mask off Old Man Smithers, and he's really, an occultist of a Cthulhu and probably
Yeah.
has tentacles. So that, so I got to go a little bit different direction when I'm doing them.
I wonder if in the 20s she was hedging against kind of the religious opposition to magic and that kind of thing, and making the books palatable, you
I,
know.
I I really don't think so. I think she really, I mean, I think herself was a rather pragmatic person. She was
Mm.
actually she was one of the first female correspondents in World War One. She supported her family through her writing. Just was she was a very commercial writer. She wrote a lot. And I think she knew that kind of gothic-y, but not too scary sold
Yeah.
well. There's always a romance in them as well, and they generally end happily. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Red Light. The I want to say that's it. I'm gonna have to look it up while I'm doing this.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
is
I'll have to check that
interesting.
out. That does sound really
Yeah, well, it's interesting because yeah, the Red Lamp. I'm sorry, the Red Lamp. Yeah, Mary Roberts Rinehart, the Red Lamp. It's one of the few that's told with a male narrator. Most of the time, she's first person female. And it actually doesn't quite give you a rational explanation for all the haunted that's gone on. It,
leaves
it
enough of a mystery there.
it's just a little, yeah, it ends kind of unsettlingly. I mean,
Yeah.
it ends okay. Everybody, the big mystery is solved, but there's just a suggestion. It's quite spooky. I thought it was, it's often cited as one of her best, and has been reprinted a number of times in like best of early American um mystery fiction of the 20th century. So yeah, definitely worth hunting her down for the Red Lamp.
Yeah, well, I'll put
Um,
a link to it in the show notes too, so folks can
yeah.
check that
Yeah,
out, because
yeah,
that
it's hard
does
to
sound.
read Red Lamp.
I just want to
And
read
then,
about her too. I mean, she sounds
oh,
fascinating.
she's pretty cool. Oh, she is very cool. So she also wrote a book that was originally published as The Circular Staircase, which is very funny because a lot of times her stuff is extremely, she's a funny writer too. About kind of an older woman who goes off to rent this house, and then all sorts of shenanigans, and there's a jewel thief and all this that are spooking her out. It was portrayed on stage and in film as the Bat, because that's our villain. And it was one of the early, it was a huge success on Broadway, and then it was a huge success as a silent movie, and is often cited as the inspiration for Batman.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Kind of got the idea from Batman of, it's sort of the dual personalities and stuff.
Which, does speak to the fact that, Batman is a very, very dark character for comics.
He is a dark character, and if he's based on the Bat, he's kind of really more based on the villain than the good guy. But
Yeah,
they're still
which
kind
makes
of
sense to me. Like
there's
if you
also
were, hey, let's have this character that we're going to make into a hero, but
yeah,
his not his origin story, but the origin of the character is in a villain.
yeah,
That makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, there's some of that, and then also there's some police men over undercover, and then there's people pretending not to be who they are, all that sort of stuff. So you can see any of the adaptations for film and for stage would have kind of went off in different directions too. So yeah, I'm not quite sure, but it's really fun stuff. If you start getting into these where you're going, okay, I'm into this thing and I'm going to start researching this thing. And this is why I always say when you're doing historical fantasy, like I do, half of your time is spent going, oh, look, I think Ray Roberts is going to be my inspiration. Oh, look, there's the bat. Oh, look.
Oh
inspiration.
yeah, this last
Okay,
week.
like, 3 hours later, it's like, oh, maybe I should get off
Uh-huh.
media and Google and actually go write
Oh,
something.
I had a moment this Thursday. We do a fundraiser for the Alzheimer's Association, and Thursday was our the shortest day where we write from dawn till dusk on the shortest day, and that's kind of a dress rehearsal, and then we build up, and then on the longest day of the year, that's when hopefully the whole team comes together and we write all day. And so we were doing our shortest day, and I was, you know, you're trying to write just as many words as you can, dawn till dusk, and we're all cranking away. And I got fixated on a literally a one-line joke. Like this joke was so small, only I will think it's funny. Most people will never even notice it. But in order to understand it, I needed to know the history of nails, like housing nails, like and I went into this deep dive, and I'm like, I am wasting so much time trying to figure out which group in history made the best nails. Who should this modern character reference? Should they be
Oh,
Roman nails? Should they be Glasgow nails? Then I,
oh,
I
oh,
went down this rabbit hole, and I was talking to these other writers, and Nancy Ballard was like telling me, you just put like an underline, and you come back to that later, but don't let it slow you down. But boy, I no, I went down a wormhole on the history of nail making. It was
oh,
very
you gotta bring in Paul Revere. Paul Revere held the contract to make the nails for the Navy.
Yeah, so and this character who was making the reference is a what 800-year-old vampire, and so I was going, would she make a reference to Glasgow nails or Roman nails? What would she, and it was just I mean, it's a one-off line where she says, oh, we're tough as nails, but I wanted to add the right adjective that she would use. It was so dumb, but we end up going, oh
Oh,
yeah, I
oh,
need to have this
oh,
be right.
well, the second Forgotten Realms novel I did is City of the Dead, which is Waterdeep's graveyard, which basically they said pick a neighborhood and base a novel on that. Because this is how a lot of these game-based novels come. The editors have an idea. This is, and they say, well, like they give you the plot. I'm like, going, no, they give you a sentence. They give you pick a neighborhood and build a plot.
Wow.
But but we're going to explain the new Waterdeep through these books. And of course, I always say that that was the one where I um almost immediately shot back the email going, bags the graveyard, because I've always wanted to do a graveyard based.
Yeah.
I have some family history with graveyards. So I was going like, okay, I want the graveyard, but I want the family that maintains the graveyard, that builds the mausoleums, etc., that builds the coffins and the shrouds and everything. So they're essentially the maintenance family, the
Yeah.
Carver for Waterdeep's City of the Dead. And so this is where I laughed is like I was like I had like reference book after reference book on particularly Victorians, because Victorians were very into very elaborate um graveyards, etc. I was having these set and I was going and picking them up by the stack at the library. And at one point I was like, I wonder what they think of me. Oh well,
Uh-huh. Yes.
well,
Oh,
they
our
think I'm a
FBI
writer. No, I'm a
files.
writer, yeah.
I'm a public school teacher, and so you have to get an FBI file. You're on
Yeah.
file, and I think they just keep adding to my. Yeah, he's a public school teacher, so he's got it. We've got his fingerprints, and then all this stuff that I'm researching, somebody's just adding it to the file. It's the weirdest file. You know?
Yeah. So yeah, so so you get into this stuff and then you go down the things. And I was talking to my editor about this with Arkham Horror because I was double checking, and she said, "Oh yeah, you guys are all the same." She said, one of the other writers for Arkham Horror, he spent days researching like taxi cabs and
Yeah.
what kind of taxi cab would be, for like a taxi cab to drive up and drop somebody off and drive away.
Well, and
I
there's
totally
a
understand that.
thousand readers who would not care.
Oh yeah, they don't
One
really.
reader who would say, that's not right. Those were not the way the cabs are. And I'm
Oh
trying to get it right for that reader.
yeah, yeah. No,
Like,
I try very hard to get it right for that reader, and if they catch me out on something, it's all on me. I definitely,
yeah.
because I have other people who review are really good with this stuff and double check. But it's always fascinating because you're like, okay, am I making this up or was this really possible? And then you go, oh yeah, this actually was really possible. Or this person, a inspiration for this person would have existed.
Which is
Yeah,
fun for us because we're writing in this world where, you turn around and there's a Cthulhu cultist
right.
and nobody's going, that has to be historically accurate. And then you turn around and you go, but I need to get the kind of blouse she's wearing correct, because
Yeah.
otherwise it takes away from the realism of the Cthulhu cultist over here. And so, all these that balance of these details must be accurate to create this bring this unreality into something that feels otherwise real. And so that, yeah, the research portion is fun, and at the same time, like, I feel like, am I wasting an incredible amount of time? These are werewolves and vampires, so of course this isn't real.
I
But
think you have to do it. I think you have to ground. Yeah, you have to
yeah,
ground people. And it's the ones that are really well grounded in that reality that then become very relatable
hmm
to
yeah,
you. I mean, I always like again, I'll just go back because a lot of people are aware of Game of Thrones. I think, he grounds it in basically Shakespearean historical plays. And there's a lot of the inspiration comes out of that and all the Henrys and the battles and frankly, in medieval Europe, they were just as weird as they are in Game
yeah,
of Thrones, if
oh
not
yeah,
more. I mean, they did some pretty horrible things to each other. And so, yeah, there's a lot of that, and he's trying. I mean, George R. R. Martin is doing an amazing job with that when he came out with it of going for a different flavor in fantasy and trying to get into that real grit and
yeah.
and bloody battle.
Yeah,
That's
I know he's, taken a lot of criticism, taken a lot of heat from folks who are upset about the way that women are treated in the stories. And I'm like, you need to read about medieval Europe. Women were treated much, much worse
Oh,
than they
women were
are in
treated
his
worse throughout
stories.
history. I will argue that women played much more varied roles
Hmm
than he kind of allows them to.
Yeah,
And again, he's trying to tell a certain story and he's looking at a certain type. I think this is where a lot of people get tripped up in historical fiction is yes, legally they had zero rights.
yeah,
Yes, legally they couldn't do this, that, and that. But then when you start researching the history, you constantly find the women who got around it, and especially when you get into later and where I'm writing in the 20s, even, up into the things at this point, and 20s in particular are very interesting because at this point they have won the vote. They have won the vote. This has happened. This was like a big culmination. They've won prohibition, whether that was good or bad. There was a lot of reasoning behind why they tied the, prohibition and why they wanted it. Um, it just ended up being a really bad idea.
right.
Um, they have won some big battles. And then they are also moving out into, somewhat freer economy. The economy's booming. They've got more opportunities for careers. And you have, especially in these sort of new and developing technologies, you have a lot of women flowing into them because there's space.
Yeah,
So I think a lot of people don't realize like the early movies that are happening, especially in the teens, before we get into the 20s and they start kind of building the bigger studios and things start getting a little more regimented. Women are all over the place. They are behind the camera, they are running the camera, they are directing, they are writing, they're not just actresses.
yeah,
So if you portray that the only outlet for their creativity is actress, you're actually, you're not looking at who was there. They're very involved in the businesses. The biggest one, of course, is Mary Pickford, who is a
yeah,
huge superstar and forms United Artists. I mean, she's one of the artists in United Artists, Charlie Chaplin and Douglas
yeah,
Fairbanks, and the others. And so, she's a crackerjack when it comes to her contracts. I mean, she's holding, this is how she amasses her wealth. She's very good at negotiating her contracts, getting her royalties, et cetera, et cetera. And then she and Fairbanks and Chaplin are all forming United Artists just to do that, to control their image, to control their um the thing that makes, that they're selling, which is themselves, and to be able to get paid for it well. And there's echoes of that in the current
Oh yeah.
an artist strikes. This is, they're hitting the same thing. And you also get into other folks. You've got Disney coming into right about now, because Steamboat Willie comes out. It's at a century. And the Disney brothers are forming their studio and not only copywriting, but trademarking. And nowadays, of course, everybody mutters about the Disney Goliath and how much they own. But remember, the brothers, Walt trademarks Mickey and fights so hard to protect Mickey because he had Oswald stolen.
Yeah.
And another cartoon called Oswald the Rabbit. And that was literally stolen from him by another um, filmmaker, and he lost total control over that property, which at the time was considered much more valuable than Mickey. And so he just ties Mickey up in, just every way he can. So this won't happen to him again. And you have to have a certain sympathy at this point
Oh yeah.
as an
Well, I
artist.
think that's what's so interesting about studying this is it's people figuring out, especially women, people of color, figuring
Yeah,
out how to amass power in a system that is designed so that everything that they do to amass power for themselves also reinforces the power structure against women and people of color, right? And so they're,
yeah.
ultimately I think you could make a real strong argument that a lot of the studio system was kind of a backlash to,
Yeah, they made it, they got it very nervous. I mean, well, Congress got very nervous. Congress got it. I mean, everybody got very nervous about the early films and the whole censorship and everything that came in. And I mean, it just mirrors what you see with the internet and what's going on now and all the
oh,
arguments that
the
are
book
going on.
bans. I mean,
AI and
it
everything
was
else.
it's the Moms for Liberty is, the moral, it's presented as a moral panic. We need to protect the children from this, when really it's we need to protect the children from women having power, queer people having power, people of color having power. That's what's scary, but it's presented as we're protecting the children from obscenity,
We need
from,
to protect the social norm because these
yes.
people are nibbling away at it
Yeah.
and in very ways that might make our control of property, wealth, whatever. So yeah, so there's very interesting stuff going on in especially the teens. The teens are very loose and there's lots of different movies being, and there's lots of movies being made around the world too. I think this is the other thing we tend to forget when we get into the silent films. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to get into that much in these books, but I keep threatening to go to Europe at some point.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Because there's a really interesting I mean, there's a little bit people know from Hugo and some books like that, there's a really interesting silent movie industry being built in Europe, which World War One set back enormously. I mean, that was just, it just devastated a lot of that. And so then, they sort of rebuild afterwards. But yeah, there's some really fascinating stuff that's going on. There's some really strange and spooky stuff, which of course, you'll see the original Nosferatu silent movie is,
Yeah.
is
Well, and
scary.
yeah, you could take your characters if as they age up, if you want to
Oh yeah.
leave that era and get into the 30s German movie scene.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, that's very strange.
because, there was a real recognition that this new art form is a propaganda vehicle. And, and that people I find this really fascinating that one of the things that the Nazis recognized very consciously was that we adjust to a particular medium and we're able to then deal with it with a certain kind of remove and not objectivity, but we can, once we've adjusted to print, we're able to distrust print. And then the radio comes out, and people were, early on very easily manipulated by the radio because they hadn't kind of built up
Yeah.
those defenses. And then films come out and they haven't built the defenses yet. And I think this is an important thing for us to be realizing in the internet age. there are a lot of folks who are saying, well, it came across my Facebook feed. It's from a person that I know, therefore it's trusted. I have not yet built up the defenses to say, oh, they just passed on this meme, because we are living in that same,
Well,
we have
we're
not
we're
changed.
living in the chaotic invention era,
Yeah,
which is really interesting because the 20s is another really chaotic invention area where everything starts out very small. People are literally doing it in their garage, radios like that. So bootleggers dance. So every book I picked a tech to kind of play around with a little bit with. Mask of Silver, we've got movies are happening. Um, the Deadly Grimoire, besides letting me make lots of jokes about book collecting, because
right.
one of my protagonists is the handsome bookseller who's running around trying to find the Deadly Grimoire. But it's also aviation, and so
Yeah,
we've got early female flyers in it. We've got people wing walking and doing all kinds of stunt stuff because there's a lot of aviation going on as kind of a stunt thing, and it's just starting to come in as a travel. The mail is being delivered by air, but really it's more of an entertainment. It's
yeah.
like they're coming out to see people fly and do dangerous stunts in their planes, which they really did. And then you
Oh my
find some
gosh.
footage of these
I
things, and
went
you're like,
through
this
an
person was
airborne.
insane, you know.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
wild.
yeah, they do really wild stuff. And a lot of women flying. There was a
Yeah.
lot of women who were flying. There was a lot of women who were involved in that. So I'm doing the bootleg. So that's Deadly Grimoire. And then Bootleggers Dance um is a radio because they're running a radio station as well as a dance hall. And Nova Malone, who was a villain in book two and is pretty much a hero in book three, if morally a little gray. Uh, but
Yes.
but everybody loves Aunt Nova because she's the aunt of the protagonist. Is running her radio station and basically sending out coded messages via radio to tell her bootleggers where to go, which was true.
Yeah.
That was something I came up with out of Seattle history. There in Seattle, which had a very different bootlegger culture than Chicago. Chicago, of course, has the mobs and the
Yeah.
alcohols, and especially by the 30s, it's very violent. I mean, they were
Yeah.
shooting people,
Literally shooting people on the streets.
literally shooting. The Valentine's Day massacre. I had a great grandmother who heard it.
Wow.
We'll talk about that later on because my mother was telling me about it. Yeah, she can remember her grandmother talking about hearing because it happened kind of around the corner from their apartment building. Um, so yeah, there was a lot of violence, but Seattle had kind of a calmer bootlegging scene, possibly because the major bootlegger was the chief of police
Ah,
and told his guys not to carry guns because he didn't want his police and his bootleggers to get into shootouts, which I thought was kind of cool.
that is very cool.
He also ran a radio station. And his wife did stories for the kiddies, which is pretty typical at that era, where she would just read a fairy tale or a little kiddie story, on a weekend afternoon. And when they were raided, and it was all broadcast out of their house, their whole studio was built into their house. And they were both arrested. He was convicted. She was finally let go, but they had charged her with sending coded messages through those stories, which they
That's
didn't. They did.
wild.
They either didn't. There's still a lot of debate, if you get into the local histories and stuff about whether that was true or not, or the feds kind of overstepped themselves. But I thought it was so cool. I thought, okay, well, in my case, they really will be sending coded
Yeah.
messages.
Well,
And
and I know there were stories of that. There was a man
yeah,
who very famously wrote the Superman radio show. Have you heard this story?
no, I have not. I got
Yeah,
so
so the guy who wrote the Superman radio story lived in the South. I cannot remember what city, and joined and worked his way up in the KKK and was taking their messages, their codes, their characters, and then making them not just villains, but the absurd villains. In the Superman stories. So these guys are going off to their KKK meetings, and then they're coming home and they're hearing their children talk about Superman beating up whatever dragon
Yeah,
code word thing it was. And it was a way of shaming these guys. And, and so they're going, nobody's supposed to know about that. And yet the very next day I'm hearing on the radio
yeah,
about Superman punching, the dragon character or
yeah.
whatever. And
Body
it was
punch.
remarkably effective as this kind of
Anti-propaganda.
radical propaganda, like let's make fools of this terrorist organization. So I thought that was
You
very
just
clever.
get into a couple of conspiracy theories right there. The liberals are out to get us through Marvel Comics.
Yes, yes, yes. That's, I mean, the folks who are going, oh, there are people who are, people of color and people who are Jewish and they're in the media and they're sending us messages. And it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, always have been, because these are the only way, these are mechanisms to get to speak out and, have been since the beginning. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Another one, and cite him um, in the last thing is a gentleman named David Armstrong who ran the musical theater here for a good many years. Has a wonderful podcast on um, Broadway Nation, which basically does tell the stories. He says of, how Jews, queers, and others, created the American art
yeah,
form. And it's a phenomenal. I mean, he just finished up like a five-parter on Noel Coward. So he kind of got off into the English stuff, but yes, I mean, you listen to Broadway Nation, and it's such an interesting and about how radical they would
yes,
get and how they'd slide this stuff into popular entertainment. And then, they get their little hand slapped and then they go back to something else.
yeah,
But yeah, see, yeah, it's very interesting. It is a constant. All through the early 20th century, you're getting this.
yeah,
Everybody's pushing, everybody's very aware. I mean, it isn't, I think we act like they weren't aware the laws were unjust. They were very aware
yeah,
and they were fighting it in every way they could think of. But um, yeah, sometimes it got it gets kind of strange. The stories of how they go
yeah.
through things. It's really wonderful. I mean, it's wonderful stuff because you can ladle it all into a book, and then they'll say, "Oh, you're just, you're bringing in a 21st century sensibility." I'm like, "No, I'm bringing in a 1920s sensibility."
Yeah, rediscovering
Really
a
disapproved of
1920
this. Yeah,
sensibility.
they
Yeah.
really disapproved of this, and they really didn't like this. They really did want to talk about these things.
Well, and to bring it back around to where we began, this is, if folks are listening to this on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
Our conception of Christmas was invented predominantly by Jews, people of color, the queer community, like, Broadway, the songs that were playing on the radio. Christmas was not a big deal until it's, our modern incarnation of Christmas. Ooh, probably should have used the word incarnation, but
Yeah. Well,
our
yes.
modern conception of
And I
Christmas is a Jewish
luckily,
construction largely.
yes, so Bootlegger's Dance is, among other things, a time travel novel because I really wanted to drive myself insane. So I have one
Mhm.
character who's bouncing through time, but he only comes out into our world. He goes sort of in and out of a eldritch alternative cosmic horror universe, and then he comes out into our world um on Christmas Eve. So he's experiencing Christmas Eve from about 1908 or so on through to the 40s, which the only reason for that was so I could get past the 20s and introduce him to White Christmas, which is
Yes,
the iconic
yes,
Christmas song written by a lovely Russian Jewish immigrant.
right.
Um,
Yes,
and it is the saddest song too. If you
yeah,
listen to it, it is one of the saddest songs, and there's a lot of history behind it. But probably the reason it became so huge is that Bing Crosby, crooner ultimate, records it and it is released during World War II, where
yeah,
with men are all overseas.
yeah.
And
And I think the reason
they
it is,
ship this thing around. It plays on everybody's, radio station, but it also the LP, the records are shipped to the guys. They're playing it overseas. and of course, it is pulling every heartstring.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
and,
and I
and
think my
recently,
partner and I were just talking today about how these
yeah,
secular Christmas songs, I think the reason that one did so well is
always.
it taps into, I mean, yes, certainly it's because it was being sent to the soldiers away, but even after the war, it taps into the fact that for many people, Christmas is something we have very mixed feelings about. Like, I do not have purely positive memories of Christmas. I have, some awful Christmases and some wonderful Christmases, and I'm not a Christian anymore. It's not a religious holiday for me. And so I've got all these mixed feelings, and that song being sung by somebody who is smiling, and Crosby is singing as though he is,
Very
enjoying
sad.
himself, and yet it is deeply sad. And I
It's
think that
sad,
conflictingness
but
really works.
yeah, and then to get really spooky, and you really should go listen to David's broadcast on it, but is some speculation. And again, this goes back and forth, and I hear both things, but um Berlin lost a child and and is supposedly visits the grave every Christmas.
Yeah,
So then you're like, okay.
yeah.
And he's writing about, and then it's like, oh my gosh. But then he wrote that in Midsummer, and so maybe, but maybe that is, but some of this stuff maybe is a little unconsciously influencing him. So yes, it's just and he is the outsider. He doesn't come from that Christian culture. He's comes from Russian Jewish culture. So yeah, I mean, you get all this stuff.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, that song in particular has so burrowed its way into our
Oh
collective
yeah.
minds is that, what do you hear every year on the weather forecast right about now? Are we going to have a white Christmas or not?
Right. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why, because of that one song.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, so let's go to our commercial break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask you what you've been daydreaming about. Authors, poets, screenwriters, writers of all kinds. We're putting together our team for the Alzheimer's Association's annual The Longest Day fundraiser, and we want you to join us to use your writing superpowers for a good cause. Our team, Writing Against the Darkness, joins together via Zoom or in-person meetups and writes from dawn until dusk on the summer solstice, and we also do a dress rehearsal to kick things off on the shortest day, the winter solstice. So mark your calendars for Thursday, December 21st, 2023, and Thursday, June 20th, 2024. We're teaming up with some wonderful partner organizations to build our team. Thanks to the Author Alchemy Summit, Indigo Editing, Unsolicited Press, Pile Press, the Pile Press magazine Chunk, and Overcut Press for joining with Not a Pipe Publishing in this fundraiser. Links to all the partners in the show notes. If you want to get to network with writers from these great partners, get a whole lot of writing done, and raise funds for Alzheimer's research and care for families suffering from this disease, click on the link in the show notes and join the team. You're going to be writing anyway. Why not write even more and do some extra good for the world? So, Rosemary, welcome back. So, lately, what have you been daydreaming about?
Oh, well, generally, I'm obsessing about all those aggravating things that happen around this time of the year because, again, we're just a couple days from the holidays, so I've tried to make sure I've got everything all together because I'm hosting Christmas dinner for my family
Oh,
this
yeah.
year. I also is always things break down around the everybody does all like things.
Oh, yeah.
I've got a drain that's backed up, so how do I find a plumber? Do I want to bother with it now? No, I'll probably wait till after the first of the year. It's the end of the year, like all good writers. This is kind of the time where I sort of look around and go, oh yeah, taxes are going to be
Oh,
sometime in spring. I got to figure out what I've paid, what I can write off and stuff. So I'm looking at these piles of files and going, do I need to keep every piece of paper I own? No. How do I get rid of it? And I thought about this. I thought this probably isn't exactly the answer you normally get, but the thing I always hear from folks about writing is when I get my novel published, it's going to change my life.
yeah.
And I'm always at a writer conference going, it is a tremendous accomplishment to get a
Yeah.
novel published. It's a tremendous accomplishment to write one and congratulations to everybody who's even trying to do this, because it is really tough work. And
Yep.
I say this, but I've had 5 novels now, as well as a number of nonfiction books published. And I gotta tell you, it doesn't remove
No,
the day-to-day aggravating.
not a bit.
So my brain is always going on these other things too. And I think, I wish it would. I wish, like my book would come out, and of course, as Terry Pratchett put it even better, I dream the dream of all writers that I'll have so much gold in my pockets, I'll need 2 dwarfs to hold up my pants.
Yeah.
But it still isn't going to remove all those little things that are distracting you all the time when you're not writing.
Yeah.
So the one thing I do think that's being great about a writer is you can stuff a lot of that into your books. So
Yes.
if it's something where I can't practically solve it, it's just I'm very aggravated, maybe what somebody has said, maybe it's some weird thing I've observed out there in the world or in the news. I can stuff that into a book and then resolve it the way I want it to resolve. In
Yes.
real life, I may not get the happy ending, but in the book, I get the happy ending. So that's, I think, the joy of the daydreaming as a writer is then I get into these kind of weird little things like I don't know, like
Yeah.
getting locked in a room. I got locked in a bathroom one time at my massage therapist, and it took them a half an hour to figure out how to get me out of it. And I was actually pretty calm. They were always like, "Oh, you've been so nice." I'm like, "Yeah, well, I'm sitting here taking notes."
Right.
It's because I'm gonna have somebody locked in a room and going, "No, you really have to call somebody and break the lock." This is
Yeah.
what they didn't want to do. I said, "Because I can't stay in here."
Right.
You know? They were sort of fussing on the outside. So, which they did. They finally did call somebody and break the lock. But so I keep thinking
Yeah.
about
But you're right. I mean, to go back to that period before your book comes out, I'm always reminded of a great quote by Douglas Copeland, who said, "The period before your book comes out is the calm before the calm."
yeah, it
We
is.
think, oh my gosh, it's all going to hit all of a sudden. This is, and then your book comes out and nothing really changes. And so I love your idea that that is just another one of those things that we get to incorporate and process through our writing.
Yes,
Like,
I'm gonna do that too. And then the flip of that is, and sometimes I have to tell myself, hey, stop a moment and enjoy this, because I do get notes from people at this point. I'm fairly accessible online. So people find me through Twitter, we'll call it that, because I still have gotten used to X.
I will still call
Or
it Twitter. I'm not going to refer to it by a variable. Variable means
where it's Twitter. It's people
Twitter.
tweet me. Or they find me on Blue Sky these days or elsewhere. And I can tell you there is truly nothing more enjoyable in a writer's day than to have some person say, "Hey, I just read your book and really enjoyed it."
Yeah. But
And
I
very
agree. We need to learn to celebrate those things. A friend of mine, Mindy Crouchley, just finished the first draft of a manuscript and was acknowledging online that she still has, a year's worth of work to do. And
yeah,
I was saying, celebrate this. You
yeah,
have, gotten to the point, and this is not her first writing, but that she finished this big manuscript that she's been working on. And so remember that name, everybody. Mindy Crouchley is going to be,
yeah,
you're going to be excited about this book when it comes out, but it's not going to come out for a while. There's a lot of work she still has to do. And I always tell folks, if we worked in a normal office, there would be this normal rhythm of celebration. Oh, Susie down in shipping and receiving is having a birthday, and we're all going to have cake in the break room.
yeah.
And we don't have that. And so we need to create for ourselves these celebrations to acknowledge, yes, this is a huge deal. We're going out to dinner because I finished this draft. Like,
I think so. And I think also just acknowledge, like don't beat yourself up if you wake up the day after your book is published and the drain is still clogged and you still have to figure out how to find the plumber and you still have to do the tax paperwork and stuff. You are not a failure as a writer that these things are starting to consume you, because these are just the human life and you've got
Yeah.
to deal with them. And then you can go back to being a writer, but you can say, oh, but then I can incorporate some of this funniness into the world I'm writing, and
And when you
even
do
though it makes me a
incorporate it,
more
that
balanced human being. But yeah, but there's the things, and I think it's very interesting to me. This could be a little bit surprised because I didn't give you this ahead of time, but right before I got the Aconite contract for the first book, Mask of Silver, for them, I had been literally out of writing for a couple of years, just because of job. I was doing a really time-consuming, brain-consuming job as the director of communications and marketing for an arts college. I just did not have a lot of
yeah,
time.
I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah. So I it just sort of happened, you know. I mean, I had books came out with Wizards of the Coast. My editor went off to do a job for Amazon, so I kind of lost that contact. This is the other thing they don't ever tell you when you're not
Right.
writing. You're dealing with the fact that the people you're depending on to buy your writing are leaving for other jobs, and this
Yes.
happens to all of us.
Oh, the
Just
constant
in
churn.
general.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a constant churn. So so I hadn't really, but normally what you do is you kind of reset and then you pitch elsewhere. And I had a very busy job, so I just wasn't doing that. And then for a ton of different reasons, I walked out of that job, and a friend said, "Hey, there's this company starting up, Aconite, back in England. They're looking for writers who do IP writing, which is intellectual properties. Um, and you have experience." And I said, "Yeah, well, I have two novels with Forgotten Realms." So I wrote to them, and it was the classic. I did everything wrong. I always tell people I do everything wrong, and then somehow but I mistyped my email on their
Oh,
application. But I did my Twitter address correctly. And bless her heart, Lottie, the editor, actually DM'd me through Twitter and said, "I've been trying to write you back.
yeah.
It's bouncing." And this is the email I got. And I went, "Oh, that's off by one letter. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry. This is what it really is." So, yeah, it's like, oh
Isn't
my
that
God.
wild? One
Yeah.
letter could have made
Yeah,
a
it's one letter, but
huge
then, because of the
difference. And
bounce. Yeah,
luckily,
it makes a huge bounce. So always double check that when you're filling out a form. Um, so those sort of things. So, I was just thinking, oh, I applied for this thing, nobody loves me, blah, blah, blah. No, they just hadn't been able to get a hold of me.
yeah,
And they actually cared enough to track me down. So I think we have to learn to sometimes quiet. So see, this isn't daydreaming. This isn't like, oh, I'm thinking about this lovely thing I'm going to do. Mine is always, of course, all these inner little worries that nibble away at you
yeah,
and hold you back. And it's like, I need to stop obsessing about those things and start thinking about, oh, this person liked my book.
right.
Person
Yeah,
sent me
enough
a
to
like,
go out
hey,
of her way to track you down.
track me down and say something to me. And then, since then I've had, amazing readers who have cared enough to track me down and say to me, "Hey, I like your book. When are you going to write another one?"
When's the next one
It's
coming out?
always the question where you're like,
The
well,
the
when I
highest
can sell
praise.
it,
I'm
but
looking forward to
yeah.
your next book. Yes.
Yeah, and that is so nice. And I don't know. I know all writers say this to their readers, but I don't know if their readers believe this. But honestly, if you want to distract us from writing, please send us a message and say, "Yeah, I loved your book."
Yeah.
Because there is simply nothing that will make us more glowy and happy and keep us away from the keyboard, but at the same time, will give us so much energy to go back to the keyboard to
Oh,
start writing.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I tell folks that the length of the review is not important. It can
Yeah,
be so short. You can just say, "I really enjoyed this," and then post
yeah.
it to Amazon and Goodreads and send it to me on Twitter. And it will be the best day for me. You
It-
know,
yeah, it really
that's
is.
all we want is yes, I was working for you I satisfied the reader. That makes me so happy.
Well, that was, and sometimes, honestly, you don't know what mountains you will move. I do have one reader who wrote me a very sweet note about Deadly Grimoire. Said I really enjoyed it. Um, is it wrong that I liked Nova so much and she's the villain?
Yeah.
And I wrote her back and I said, no, I like her so much. I think I'll bring her back in the next book as the hero.
Yeah,
So,
right.
but this was kind of confirming what I had been thinking. It is nice to get those notes.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. My friend Kate Ristow, her trilogy, the kind of friend character who was introduced in the first book was so much more popular than the protagonist that over the course of the series, by the end, the second book is very much the two of theirs, and by the third,
Yeah.
I would argue that the friend character has become the protagonist, and it was because readers said, we love her. We want more of her.
Yeah.
Hennessy is really fun and funny and witty, and and the other character is very driven and
Yeah.
and she's the kind of prototypical protagonist, and the funny sidekick became the protagonist by the end. It's wonderful transition over the course of the trilogy because of reader feedback.
And it is, yeah. I mean, I think it is, you do hold yourself. I think writers do, no tracking. And sometimes you just feel like, yeah, what you're still, and you're like, yeah, that's a lovely idea, but it's not going to fit with where I'm going five
Right.
books ahead. So yeah, we're not going to do that. But I do think, any kind of review is helpful. And it's helpful for me because like what I said, what I do all the time is read. I read much more than I write. And I'm always looking for new writers and I'm always looking for new series. And I do have certain people who are friends on Goodreads who I look at their reviews and I think, well, if Stephanie likes this, Stephanie Burgess is a
Mhm.
wonderful historical fantasy writer herself, likes this, I'm probably going to like this.
Yeah. Yep.
You
Well, and I do a lot of hand sales events, which is a wonderful opportunity to learn marketing, like what is actually, moving the needle, because it's so hard to
know?
tell when you're, sitting in your own office. And my partner, my fiance, is the one who is really good at the hand sales, and so I'm listening to her sell these books to folks. And she's, wonderful about hearing what it is they are interested in first, and then saying, "Oh, you'll like this book or this book or this book that the company puts out." And I was convinced that I had convinced myself that the second book in my current trilogy was people were going to love the idea of baby werewolves. And I was like, yeah, I've got these, toddler werewolves who turn into very deadly wolves, but they're also adorable. They're puppies. And I thought this was going
Yeah,
to be great.
yeah.
And what she found was at one point she was telling somebody about the book and she's going, yeah, and it's got baby werewolves and it's got lesbian vampires. And somebody behind that person in line went, lesbian vampires. And
Fires.
then somebody behind them went, lesbian vampires. And so now we're like, it just needs a blurb that's just, yes, this next one has more lesbian vampires. Like that is gonna
We put
apparently that's what makes it sell. We don't need to say baby werewolves, lesbian vampires.
it is. People, are looking for something, are hearing something, sometimes hear something different than you might have even
Yeah.
thought was, like I said, I had, um, well, probably my best review for Max's Silver was that all the characters in Rosemary's books would terrify Lovecraft because, they're gay and they're
Right.
not white.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's what I have loved the
Yeah.
this kind of rediscovery of Lovecraft that is transforming him. Have you read N.K. Jemison's The City We Became and the yeah, that different folks taking Lovecraftian ideas and then
Yeah.
saying we're going to do something that he would hate, and hers are even like consciously referencing
Yeah.
referencing Lovecraft and then saying no, I'm going to do something very different, which I love. We can just because somebody is writing something that is in the world of in the vein of Shakespeare does not mean they need to take on the anti-Semitism and sexism of Shakespeare. Like you
No,
can
you
challenge that in these
need to write
wonderful
the
ways.
story. You need to write the story you want to write too. I mean, and that, would not be a story that would interest me at all in writing. But yeah, and also I say, well, yeah, and besides which my book is really more Chambers and Mary Roberts Rinehart than it is Lovecraft. There's
Yeah.
elements of that, but I think those two writers are probably much more heavily influential. Certainly Mask of Silver, but it was very funny to start reading these things and and back when I was doing the D&D novels, I was getting sort of the same thing from folks. I would get Crypt of the Moaning Diamond, which was the first one I did, which is basically set the action underground. That was the idea I was given. So I wrote about a group of sappers who are the guys who bring down the walls and sieges. And of course, mine is led by a female captain because it's D&D and you can do that.
Yeah.
And I have just sort of a mixed group of folks. And being me, I dump them into their problem, which is they basically crash through the hole they're starting to dig to go under the wall, and they crash into the dungeon below, and then it into a river, an underground river that they weren't expecting, thereby pretty much wiping out all their supplies. And they have to get themselves back out of there while, fighting with very little equipment. Their spellcaster can't actually cast all her spells because she's broken her arm. I just gave them all sorts of handicaps. And they had a dog. The dwarf adopts dogs, and so he has a little white dog, which was based on a friend's Maltese. So they have a little white annoying dog that they're taking through the dungeon. My best note ever I got from a reader was this guy writes to me about right after the book came out. He says, I like really dark, really grim fiction. Your book isn't that, which is
Yeah.
not, it's silly. And he says, but I'm enjoying it, but I'm worried about the dog.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if I can continue if something happens to the dog. And I
Yeah.
thought, you like it grim, you like it dark, and you're worried about the puppy. Good for you. So
Yep.
I brought him back. I
Yes.
said,
Yes.
the
I like this
puppy,
person. They've got their priorities
I
straight.
got their priorities straight. I said, the puppy survives. And I actually then went on and had another friend who was an artist draw me a little white dog. And I had a book plate made up, which I was sending out to the fans. It says, no dogs are harmed in the course of this book.
Yes.
This is my absolute guarantee. Everybody
Well,
else basically gets stomped, and my
yeah.
my guy in the best armor runs into a rust monster, so he loses everything, but down to his underpants. But yeah, but dog survives.
So this brings me to my next question. So I think I love the world of D&D. I have never been able to
D&D.
successfully schedule a game and find the right DM for me, but I love everything about it. My son has gotten me into Baldur's Gate 3, which let me tell you, oh, it is
Oh yeah, no, I'm hearing good things about
it's
that.
very
I
cool.
stay far away from it because I do want to actually do
Yes,
some
it is
writing in the next
dangerous. Yeah,
year.
especially now that you mentioned the taxes. I'm like, oh no, I can't be playing Baldur's Gate. I've got to finish all the royalties by the 31st. But so but I like asking this question to writers because I think it's a good kind of Rorschach about who we are as people, and it helps readers get to know us. If you yourself were a D&D character, what would be your race and class?
Well, I started playing back in college, and my very first character was a gnome illusionist who routinely got toasted by larger opponents, and sometimes by his own party because we had a wizard who wasn't really good with her fireballs. So I think playing that character really fed into my desire when I got around finally many years later writing for Wizards of the Coast to do these stories of lesser powered individuals.
Hmm.
My folks are never
The
12th
tanky barbarian.
level,
Yeah.
powerhouses who are going to plow down. I mean, my guys are always like I said, the first book, they lose all their equipment. So even if they're rather good at what they do, they are severely handicapped. My second book, City of the Dead, I actually had folks writing to me and saying, Rosemary, I think you just wrote an entire novel about NPCs, non-player characters.
Ah,
And I went, ah, yeah,
yeah,
pretty much. There's
yeah.
a wizard. He's kind of a low-level wizard. He comes in and helps our female protagonist investigate the mystery, but he's not terribly good. He's a little bit, he's not a gnome, but he's probably like kind of that level. He can throw a few spells that are useful, but mostly he's just wandering around after her and getting hit over the head. So, it's just,
Yeah.
yeah, I like these people because even today when I play games, I'm always thinking, well, what are the folks on the street thinking as we rush past them to go battle the big bad or dig up the castle to find the treasure or whatever we're doing.
I love that.
Like,
There's a
what
book
is that
from
shopkeeper thing? It's like, oh God, them
yeah,
again. They're coming through again.
this should become a whole genre. There is a one of the
Oh,
novels that is nominated for the Nebula this
oh
year
yeah.
about a tea shop, a barbarian who starts a tea shop.
Yeah,
Like an
Legends and Lattes. Yeah.
yeah, which I have not read yet.
Oh,
I
it's fabulous. It's very
wonderful
good on
praise.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. He's doing the what do they do after,
yeah.
which is really interesting. He takes his um very typical player characters, your arc fighter who's battled her way through things and is ready to hang up and run the coffee shop. So that's and has discovered coffee. It's going to introduce lattes to this town. It's a phenomenal book. It's really funny. It's really sweet. It actually has a really good plot. T. Kingfisher is doing the same thing with their Saints of Steel series. If you um, catch that one, starts with Paladin's uh, Grace and goes on from there. Saints of Steel, the guys are all paladins,
Yeah.
those super tough warriors, straight spines, etc. Whose god has died, and so they've gone mad.
Yeah.
And then they've recovered from that madness due to the sect of the White Rat, which if you are a Teen Kingfisher fan, you will immediately go, oh wait, the White Rat's in this too. So she's been playing around with these things. And there's a lot of that in her books, but they're very interesting because they are essentially what happens afterwards.
Yeah.
How does being on these murder adventures really impact people? And it's fun and they're funny. I feel Terry Pratchett did the same thing with his guards sequence.
Absolutely.
He
It's
always said guards was about, what happens to those poor dudes who usually get plowed over by the hero that they're just standing duty. Hey, we're here to protect the castle. Oh God, the hero came in to, and has thwacked us and gone on. And so I think anytime you start playing with those characters and introducing them into the Melu, you open up just a whole lot of fun for yourself and for the reader. So
yeah. But I love the idea of the NPC. My
yeah,
protagonist in my current series is the woman who works at your office and you don't know that she's a frustrated writer at home. Like
yeah,
that's who is not published, who is not, even brave enough to send her writing off to anyone. And she's the person that you walk by and you don't pay enough attention to, and she's amazing. Like
yeah.
that's a really interesting character to me
It is, and
rather than the hero,
yeah, and it's one that the reader can identify with it.
Right.
I think as much as we all love Superman and Batman and some of those really high-powered characters, um, I don't know about you, but that's not me. I'm
Nope.
I'm the person who just makes it through to the end of the week and goes, "Whoop, I
Yeah.
did it. I
I
got
heard
to
this
the end of the
great
week and I didn't actually, trip over myself." So
yeah.
yeah, and so I like to write about those.
I heard this great little interview with Stan Lee where he was telling the story of coming up with Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And he went to his editor because he was not in charge of the company at the time. And he went to the editor, and the editor said, spiders are creepy. Nobody wants to read about spiders. Teenagers, nobody can identify with teenagers. And superheroes aren't supposed to have problems. They're the solution to problems.
I know
So
it.
a teenager who's got spider powers and his life isn't perfect, this is never going to sell. And Stanley put him on the cover of Amazing Tales. Amazing, yeah, I think it was
And but that's
and
I mean, that is the whole thing that Lee did in other writers following him, um, was that and why Make Mine Marvel was so different from DC is all of their guys have lives, they have problems, they
little
have
problems that are relatable.
very
Sometimes,
relatable. The whole
sometimes highly problematic. Was it
yeah.
Ant-Man who was alcoholic and spousal abuser, or was that the? Yeah, where you
Yeah,
go. Some of them don't hold up.
some of them don't, and some of them our attitudes have changed.
Yeah,
So you could probably do something about, you know, his wife.
right.
That'd be kind of interesting from
Yeah,
that standpoint. But I think, but you look at what the sort of the genesis of this is that Tony Stark is not perfect. Tony Stark, in fact, is
Alcoholic throughout the
he's
series.
alcoholic.
Yeah.
He's got some real work-life issues, he's and they brought that forward beautifully in I mean, that's what I think made the first Iron Man movie just blow out everything else everybody else was trying to do. And why all of a sudden we get this huge onslaught of superheroes. And then I will argue, like, even though it's not been like the fan fave, although I really, really enjoyed it, was the Marvels this year. You get three women who are working together who all have kind of funky issues,
Oh
but
yeah.
you've got especially Ms. Marvel, Cam's family,
They
who are
they
all
made it
over
to me.
her, and yet I want to be adopted by that
Yeah,
family.
exactly. That they were, and and I have to step back and say, I don't want to be that person who's saying, I don't like this movie because blah 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 blah. Because I'm like, no, it's not for me. Like, I'm not the target demo. I relate to her parents.
Her parents were
I love her
amazing.
parents.
Her parents were amazing, and but to me, like the the Valentine kiss moment, the one where we were saying, this is who we're really writing this movie for, is when one character turns to Cam and says, "So this is really feeding all your fan fiction ideas," and she's going, "Oh yeah, so much,"
Yeah.
and you're like, "Yeah, it's that girl.
Yep.
We're
Yeah.
writing the
I
movie
love her
for that."
character as well, but her character is my students.
Yeah,
Her parents are me.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, she's she's that kid who just, when you see her at the beginning, when she's sketching these adventures, she's having them, and at the same time, Carol is that person who is really over superpowered and doesn't know how to,
Yeah.
and can't does have no work life. I mean, she just
Yeah.
basically lives in her spaceship with her weird cat, Goose.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah,
so
and
yeah, I mean, it was
I have a
very
hard time
relatable.
relating to her. She's overpowered to me.
Yeah.
I need to know more about her struggles and problems.
Yeah, but at the same time, I kind of see her as like those sort of like women who've gotten very high up in the corporate ladder and
Type A.
yeah, that it's
Yeah.
kind of chewing their lives apart. So yeah, I like I said, there was a lot to me that was very relatable. And I also thought whoever the music director of that movie was insane because I loved all that sort of like various musical references
Yeah.
and the theme of cats. Well, yeah, memory will never quite be in my head the same way again. But yeah, it's just, there was it was a lovely little thing. It was very entangled in what they're doing with the overall universe. So I felt like to me that movie was almost like when I was a kid, I didn't buy comics that much. And I don't know that it was particularly, I wouldn't have, I spent my money on other things because I had friends who bought everything.
Yeah.
So I would go over to their houses and read them, but I would read them out of sequence or I'd just read one
Mm.
section and I didn't have all the stuff. So then I would get kind of like, okay, I'll just make up the story in my head about what the backstory is for
Right.
this. Young Mutants was very, very big for me at that point. Um, so yeah, I had that feeling with that movie. It's like I don't get everything that's going on here. For one thing, I don't subscribe to Disney, so I don't see the
Mm.
series. So I mean, I think nowadays I think the movies are so figured out. But that's okay. I can make up the story in the back of my head, and it gives me that sort of I'm, I'm
Yeah.
17 and I'm sitting on somebody else's bed in the bedroom reading these
Right.
comics,
And they
trying
do
to
a
figure
very
into the
good job.
wait a
I'm
minute,
always
why is this person doing this? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm always impressed by how elegantly and briefly they catch everyone up in the
Yeah,
film.
they did actually
You
did a
don't
really good
have
job in
to
the movie. Yeah.
watch. I mean, the exposition could be painful if they did that poorly. And
Yeah.
instead
No,
of
no.
saying, here's all the lore you need to know so that this story makes sense, a couple of characters will say things briefly to one another, and someone's sitting in a writer's room going, and you know what, folks, that's enough. That's
That's
enough that
exactly.
the viewer is going to understand. We don't need to give them everything, which I
It,
appreciate.
it it makes you feel like there's a whole world going on,
Mhm.
and you don't see all of the world in one view. And that's I think the other thing, like we go back to talking about the writing and one of the things I really enjoyed from a reader sent me, it said, I get the feeling there's all this stuff going on outside the edges of your books that are happening in the other people's books or in this thing. And that I think is always a wonderful thing when you're working in an IP to convey that,
Yeah,
explaining the whole dang thing. It's just like, yeah, there's a whole lot of really creepy stuff that happens in Arkham. I'm dealing with the one creepy thing that my
right.
characters are encountering. But
Yeah,
definitely, there are shadows down. Don't go down those alleys. They're shadowy. They're shadowy for a
yeah.
reason. Things gonna
Yep.
eat you at the end of
We've gotten a bit away from it, but I did want to ask.
it. So you're gonna ask me about D&D.
Well, no, I want to ask. So your character, you've got this
I got a gnome.
illusion
That's right.
gnome, and you've been ambushed by three level one goblins in the woods. What do you do?
I run away.
I
Because
think
if
you
I'm
are
all
the
by myself,
first
I run away.
person on the
I'm gonna
show to
die.
say, I just disengage. I'm getting out
I,
of
I
here.
learned very quickly I had to run away because otherwise I got eaten. Did I mention I was a no hit points though?
No hit
Uh,
points, no.
yeah, I really was. I played this character, and so after a while, this little illusionist guy, I realized the only way I was going to make it through the game. My DM was very patient with me. As I learned, I would either go behind the biggest fighter, and that would sort of get it, or I would disappear into my pointy hat.
Which I just love. So yes, you have
Gnomes always have pointy hats. I had decided that, and so I basically modified a bag of holding to be my pointy hat, and I would just disappear up into it.
yeah,
And then when the fighting was all over, I would come back out of it.
yes.
And that was, and I can remember like the person who was running the game at the time was kind of like, eh, eh,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess that works. And that is the joy. I mean, that is the joy of Dungeons and Dragons. We do have a DM that's willing to improv with you and is not real hung up on the rules, thank God. Because like I said, I will always kind of go for this is the character moment. It is so much fun. And another person who I believe you've had on writers not writing is Nate Crowder.
I'm going to have him. Going to be next
Oh,
week.
great. Yeah,
Yes.
great. He's very funny. He also runs really fantastic games. And again, I had stepped away from D&D for a very long time, and then I came back and I was starting to write for Wizards and was talking to Nate about it. And Nate said, "Oh, I'm running a game. Do you want to come sit in?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's been okay. I'll dig out my book. I'll find my dice. I'll come
Right.
back about things." So much fun because he's very much a storyteller, and
Yeah.
we've played a lot of different systems since then. So I had one game where I was playing a Selkie fighter. So, seal lady.
Yeah.
And apparently she smelled like blubber because he had like every dog creature. I mean, they weren't just dogs. They were just there was wolves. There were dog-like things. The puppies in the village. I don't know. Everything came after me, and for some reason, those would always be my bad die rolls. I was getting chewed. So we got ambushed by I believe wolves, and he goes, "Okay, so what do you do?" And I go, "I pull out the squeaky dog toy and throw it into the bushes to distract him." And he's like, "What?" And I went, "Look, she's been attacked by dog
Yeah.
creatures at least 4 times at this point. She is now carrying, kibble, squeaky dog toys.
Yes. Her
And
basic supplies
her
include.
basic supplies now include this to get them to run away
Yeah.
because she has no luck at all fighting them. We've already established that. That was a ranger that always failed my nature rolls. So that was just a wonderful campaign. But yeah, so I would do, yes, I would do a squeaky ball. And
Yeah.
he went, "Okay, I'll give you a 50-50 chance of the squeaky ball." And I actually made it, so they ran away.
Yes. Well, and so what does this, tell you and tell readers about you that you've got the running away, the throw the squeaky ball and get out of there, like, the NPC character novelist. How do those
Yeah,
connect?
I'm definitely gonna go for I may build you up to the big fight and then I'm gonna sidestep on you. I'm gonna zig when you think I'm gonna zag. And I like to do that. I like that element of surprise.
I love it. Excellent.
You had it all figured out. There was going to be this big showdown at this point. Nope, we're
Yeah.
gonna go, we're gonna solve the problem a different way.
I love it.
Maybe
Um,
by, but and so I think to me that's fun when authors do that. I love that when I read books where it does not come down to who is the most powerful.
yeah. And I love when
Yeah,
authors play with your expectations. We
yeah,
know this leads to the big fight. And
yeah,
so then when it doesn't, that's interesting, rather than, and acknowledging that within the world of the book too. Like, this is all leading to this. No, it doesn't have to.
it can
I
go a
love that.
different. I think that's really fun. And then at the same time, I like to honor yeah, you do have to actually take care of the villain at some point. You have to figure out how to take care of the villain. You have to have that
Which I think
confrontation.
is part of
You have
taking
to
care
win.
of the reader. Like, it's part of,
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't just say I'm going to zag so much that the reader goes, and you lost me. Like,
Yeah,
I
you
have
can't.
to still keep the reader happy, but I don't want to keep the reader, saying I knew exactly what was going to happen and it happened and therefore I'm satisfied. No, I knew exactly what was going to happen and then something else happened, but it was also satisfying. Like, how do I make, that kind of
Yeah,
thing?
exactly, exactly. And I think, if we ask, so that sort of loops us all the way back to the daydream. What am I often daydreaming about when I'm not actually writing? It's how do I satisfy the reader? How do I satisfy myself? Because
Mhm.
I don't want the solution to all problems to be I pull out a gun and shoot somebody.
Yeah, who can punch the other person the hardest? That's not what I want to write. Yeah.
But particularly these days for me, it's very much, and this is probably me, but I just really want to get away with the way I win is I pull out a gun and shoot
Yeah.
somebody
Yeah. Yeah.
because we have seen the devastation caused by having too much guns in society, too many people who often are very sad, confused, desperate people thinking this is the only way I can solve my problem.
Yeah,
And
and our media reinforces it
yeah,
because
I don't,
this is the solution, and it's never the solution.
it's
Like,
never
it
the solution.
never ends the story in real life, and yet it always seems to end the story in our media, and I reject
Yeah,
that. Like, that's not the end of the story,
that's not the end of the story. It can be the beginning of the story.
right?
You can definitely be dealing with the aftermath of that. You can carry on for that. That doesn't mean that like, okay, so like I said, um, can I have bootleggers who don't have gunfights? Well, yes, I can because I found them in Seattle.
Right,
I found the guy who doesn't want to have his guys getting into gunfights because he's very aware of who they're going to fight with and they're people he knows. So he's not gonna.
right.
So then, so then I have to think about my way around that. Doesn't mean that nobody ever pulls out a gun and shoots it off. It doesn't mean that nobody ever punches somebody. These things will happen and stuff like that. But I think it's up to us as writers to always just kind of question, like, does this make sense that this would be the only solution?
I completely agree. My kind of commitment to myself is that those kinds of things will happen in my stories. That's not the end. That's
No.
not, oh, this character punched the other, and then the music played and the story came to a satisfying conclusion because I'm not satisfied by somebody pulled out a gun and shot someone and that solved anything. Like,
Yeah.
that's a different plot point. But that doesn't solve problems, and we shouldn't reinforce the idea that it does.
Yeah. So we got a little bit, I mean, I keep sidetracking you, but I
Oh
got
no,
like
it's fine.
rolling back on. So another show where I was not, a, I wasn't aware of the anime before the live action came out, but One Piece on Netflix. I don't subscribe to Disney or Hulu, but I do subscribe to Netflix. So One Piece, I really adored. It's very goofy. It's very strange. But it's about basically Monkey D who wants to become a pirate and he goes off to become a pirate. And he is becoming a good pirate and he makes very moral decisions in and around there's a lot of very anime style fighting, etc. punching people and all that jazz, which is really cool. I think it's quite lovely. I love the stylized fights in this thing. But I really think, there's a point where he says you get to choose kind of what pirate you want to be. And there's a lot of villain pirates. There are a lot of bad pirates, or comically bad. I mean, again,
Yeah.
it's very exaggerated story in wild visuals. And I just, I really, just if you've got that kind of sensibility going, I mean, it tells you a lot about my sensibility. It made me laugh all the way through. I just thought it was extremely funny and really good. But I really loved that question that comes down and plays through it is, yes, he's out to become the king of the pirates, but he's not out to be bad.
Yeah.
He's actually a really good person who helps people all the way through while being a pirate.
Right. Have you watched by any chance the animated show Avatar: The Last Airbender?
I'm aware of them. It's been a long time since I've watched them, but
Highly,
yes,
highly recommend if you like that
yeah.
element because you've got the protagonist. They made a film that is
No,
terrible,
the club's terrible. Yeah, no, I agree with you.
terrible
I
because
did
what it
kind of,
loses is that the protagonist is a a little boy who wants to have fun and
yeah.
just be kind. And they made him very serious. It was, kind of classic decision making by, a bunch of old dudes in Hollywood going, no, we need to make this guy very scary and serious. He just wants to be silly. And all the pressures of the world are trying to push him to the end of the story to confront the big bad and kill him. And he is on the run from this because he's a pacifist. He does not want to kill anyone. He just wants to ride around on penguins on the ice. Like he just wants
Like,
to giggle and
who
have
doesn't want
fun.
to ride around the penguins? Yeah.
Right? And it is from the first episode, you're like, this character is delightful. I want him to be successful in a universe where he cannot possibly be successful because things are so bad and everything is coming at him. And so figuring out how to not fall into the temptation of, and then they'll punch each other and the punching solves problems is they do a marvelous job. And one of the things they do really well is they have a clear ending in mind. And the ending is incredibly satisfying. It is the best conclusion, I think, of that kind of epic,
It-
sweeping story. It doesn't just build to, and then it to be continued, and then we ran out of money and we couldn't make season five. Like it builds in this really satisfying way. So if you want something that doesn't lead to, and then
yeah,
somebody pulls out a gun and shoots,
so
that's the
many people
one.
tell me this. So I think, you're right there. I think this is, and what's interesting is to see to me, it's interesting to see stuff coming into Western fantasy, science fiction that is very influenced by all this wonderful, strange stuff that's come out of Studio Ghibli and everybody else.
Yeah.
The anime that's a little bit different thinking. And then, like you said, you've got writers now who are coming up who have obviously read their Tolkien and they know their hardcore fantasy, and then they're looking at it from a little different angle.
Yes.
And it's really fun to see what that's producing.
Yeah, it's a good
Really
time for
exciting time to be reading and
It
writing,
really is.
you
Yeah,
know.
this is a good time for fantasy to be
Yeah,
flexing and not doing what had, been done so many times
yeah,
before.
yeah.
It's an exciting time. Changing the topic to another exciting time. What
Yes.
is
Okay.
I want to ask about your poll question. So every week
Oh, okay.
we put out a poll on social media, and I wanted to ask you, what do you think we should kind of ask the world right now?
Okay. Fruitcake. Fruitcake. Is it necessary for Christmas?
This is going to be a hot topic.
This is
Yes.
going to be a really hot topic, and I'm coming down hardcore in the fans of fruitcake. This is not
Okay.
a popular camp to be in.
That's going to be a hot take.
It
Yes,
is a
there are
hot
going to be
take.
people.
I love fruitcake. I absolutely adore fruitcake. I will say a lot of commercial fruitcake that you meet in America ain't the good stuff.
Yeah.
The good stuff comes from essentially your British
Mm.
neighbors who bake and do their own. So when I was a kid, my mom had a friend from New Zealand who made fruitcake every year. And every year we got a box of it. And she lived in the same town. So, I mean, this wasn't like traveling through the mail or getting stale or anything. It had simply been sitting up there in the top of her cool, dark cupboard, as fruitcake should, for a good month or so, percolating away in its little brandy. And then when you open the box, it's just these fumes rose out of it. Smelled amazing. And it was chock full of fruit and nuts and sticky kind of dark um pastry. And it was amazing.
See, my folks are both pastors, retired now, but that meant we got a church load of fruitcakes. And so I have had I'm not sure if I dislike fruitcake or if I've had so many fruitcakes that were not good that they turned me off to fruit, but maybe one of those was the good fruitcake and I'm just not a fan. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's one. It'll be interesting to see where people fall on that one.
We had that one, and then for many years now, I have a friend who had a Canadian grandmother who sent her fruitcake, and I would and she would like phone me, and she said, "You're my only friend who is like is the fruitcake here."
Fruitcake
I
fan.
was
Yes.
like, literally, do you have it? Can I come over?
Uh,
Your
Excellent.
baby 6. I was so laughing at me like this child now is 15, but like when this baby was like 3 weeks old and she was very frazzled, she goes, I got the fruitcake. I go, I'll come over. And I like sat for an entire day rocking this baby and drinking tea and eating fruitcake with her. She's like, oh,
Ah,
this is great because I've got because and I'm not the great, but for some reason this child just decided she was going to fall asleep when I held her,
yeah.
and her mom was like, "Oh my God, she's quiet. Oh, this is wonderful.
Yes.
Like, how much fruitcake do you want?" And so I still remember that. I was like drinking tea and eating fruitcake and going, "Shh, just you stay quiet because I
Oh
can
yeah.
I can get my fruitcake
See,
fixed."
that's the part that I would enjoy. I am like, if somebody's got a baby, I want to hold their baby
Yeah. Oh
to
no.
a degree that makes people, they're like, please don't grab my baby. But
Yeah.
yeah, I love babies, and I was at a staff party, and one of my colleagues just had a baby, and this little doll baby is so adorable and just immediately fell asleep on my arm. And so everybody else was like, are we going to get a turn? And the mom was like, nope, she is sleeping on his arm. He gets her for the whole meeting.
It is.
And it was the best day.
I'm generally, for some reason, I am the person they will fall asleep on. Cats do that too with me.
Yeah.
So I think I have a good lap. But yes, so that was yes. So I did that, and it was very funny. I talked to her. This child is now, like I said, 15 and going to Beetlejuice, and I'm still like, like really, really,
Yeah.
really.
Yes. I held you when you were this, but yep. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm trying.
That's
I try very hard not to do that line, but yes, when her mom was like, "Yeah, we're really busy," and I'm going to see folks, and so I didn't bake fruitcake this year, and I'm like, my heart is broken, but you brought it to me, so it's okay. But yeah, I
oh,
did
that's wonderful.
find I have found one commercial. It's not quite as good. It's not quite as good as the homemade stuff, but it's real close. And they are not calling it fruitcake. Walker's has what they call a Highland whiskey cake,
Mm,
which by any other name is fruitcake.
right.
But you open up the box and you take the paper across. It's this little small dark box. I mean, the box is like only like about that big. And the fumes of the whiskey come floating up out of it. It's very nice.
Yes, you
Very
know
cool.
that they actually are, yes,
Yeah.
doing it
And
right.
they're just calling it Highland whiskey cake in the States so they can get it on the shelves and go, ooh, fruitcake.
Exactly. Yes, they're dodging the fruitcake. Yes,
Yeah, they're dodging around it.
the
But I did grab
brand.
it. But I did grab a couple pieces before it sold out at my local emporium. So
Excellent. So,
I have
Rosemary, where can
fruitcake
folks
for
find
Christmas.
you? Yes. So where can folks find you when they want to find more about you online and find your books and everything?
Okay, so probably the easiest thing to do is mostly I'm under my own name. So if you go to Twitter, you'll find me under Rosemary Jones. If you go to Blue Sky, you'll find me under Rosemary Jones. If you go to rosemaryjones.com, you'll find a list of all of my little socials, which beyond that, I'm also on Instagram under Lost Loves Books, because that one is a little less about me and my writing and more about my mad book collecting.
Hmm.
Sometimes the other stuff will come in there, so you get to see all the whatever I'm spending money on right now. Um, and uh, and that's basically where you can find me. But again, if you go to rosemaryjones.com, right up at the top, there's a list of social media, and then and you can find all the different places where I blather on about whatever I'm blathering on about.
Excellent. And who do you think I should have on this show? What's another guest? Who should I reach out to?
Well, like I said, you've got Eric's got to be, who's a pretty good friend of mine. Uh, Nate Crowder, Amanda Cherry. So so I'm going to tell everybody go back and listen to those interviews. Those are all fabulous writers. They all live in the greater Seattle area, and they're all involved in what we call Cobalt City, which Nate created. And I hope you're going to talk to him about that.
Oh yeah.
It's celebrating its 20th
Oh, that's
year
amazing.
next year. I've been writing for about 15 years in this universe, and we're bringing out my collection of stories, which have appeared in a variety of anthologies and a couple other publishers, and a novella that I did a couple of years ago, which has all been reworked a little bit. There's some new stuff in there. It's not exactly the stuff you read before. Under Record Vengeance, so that'll be out in April.
Oh, good.
So I'm sorry, I'm plugging there, and I was trying
Oh
to get
no,
off.
no, yes. So yes, and we'll put,
Yeah.
folks can. I mean, I'll put a link to your website certainly, but folks can follow you and keep an eye out for that one in April. That's great.
Yeah, that'll be great fun. I'm really, really love, and I think, if you listen to Nate and Amanda and Eric, you can hear a little bit more about what we're all doing in Cobalt City because we're all having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're all quite different as writers. So very different tones, very different characters. They just sort of crisscross in odd places. Another writer, because I've been blithering out about the ladies and the marbles and all that. I would suggest Carrie Harris,
Hmm.
who writes all sorts of stories, but I particularly enjoyed her Witches Unleashed in
Oh,
the
I have
Marvel
read that.
series, which was published by Aconite. And you can find her in a variety of places online, but Carrie's does really interesting game writing and IP writing and other stuff too. And like I said, I particularly, if you like the magic ladies of Marvel, I would go for Witches Unleashed.
Yes. Oh, I'll check that out.
Really good novel.
So, some folks I have to thank before we get to our final advice for the viewers for the week. But before we get to that, thanks to the artist Max Oakland, who reached out and provided one of his songs for our intro song, I Prefer the Dusk. Let Max know you like it by following him on Twitter at Max Oakland with 3Ds. And thanks to Halisna CCO for their song Kids for the ad break. If you're in a band and you'd like your song used on the show, I'd love to highlight a listener's work like Max's song, so email me about that. Thanks to Doug, the producer, for making this show sound good and taking the blame when it doesn't. And I cannot forget to mention, Writers Not Writing is a production of Not a Pipe Publishing. So please go to notapipepublishing.com and check out the amazing books written by writers who didn't procrastinate too much. And if you like this show, rate and review it wherever you found it. Please check out Rosemary's Christmas story, The Bootleggers Dance, and tell a friend about it too. Even a very short review, single click on that 5th star makes a huge difference to Rosemary and I. I mean, these things will make our day. So if you've got 3 minutes, make Rosemary's day, check out that story, and then leave that review or send that message on social media. And I'm too old to tell you to smash that like button, but if you could gently tap on the like button for this show, I would greatly appreciate it. So, Rosemary, what would be your, preferred final message for our viewers for the week?
Oh, well, I have to go with the thing that I'm always screaming at folks when I'm watching television or reading the book. Don't go down in that basement without a flashlight.
Yes. And take your flashlight and your phone because you don't want to end up in that circumstance where your flashlight batteries start flickering. That's just horror movie territory. Right away,
Yeah,
have and
yeah.
second a
Don't,
backup light. Yes.
don't be that person. Go down with two flashlights. And
Two flashlights.
because we're entering in winter, actually make sure all your flashlights have batteries in them because you never know when the power's going to go off.
We just had a power outage and I discovered the hard way. Oh, we need to get a whole bunch more batteries, but we had lots of candles. So it was our house looked like some kind of creepy. It was just candles everywhere. But the candles are nice because they provide warmth as well when the power is out. So we kept ourselves toasty. So I always say to folks, A novel without spaces would be gibberish, and our lives need spaces too, so don't ignore those spaces. And third, no matter how much you procrastinate, we're still proud of you.
Yes, we are.
If I take my time